You know, one of the things that we can say about life is that life is full of stories. Now, I want to even make sure that you look at this from a very personal kind of perspective, because you are the hero of your story. And your story is not yet complete. Matter of fact, if I was to ask you about who you are, you might have some things to say, some, wonderful descriptive kinds of words. But if I really wanted to get to know you, what might be the most important thing I could do? It's just to listen. To listen as you tell me stories of how you were shaped, how you were formed, how you grew, how you learned. Tell stories about how you were blessed and how you've been a blessing for others. And you know what? Maybe if we knew each other well enough, you might even risk a moment of vulnerability and said, sometimes without meaning to, I've even hurt or cursed other people. But all of that, the messiness of our stories is really who we are. And what's interesting is we have a God who comes right alongside of us in the midst of our story. And that's really where we're going to pick this up today, right? Because where do we pick this up? We're actually back at Easter. This is Easter Day. It's later in the day, right? And we have Cleopas and his friend. And we don't really know fully their story. We know that they are disciples. Now, they're not a part of the original 12, but they are followers of Jesus Christ. And they're on the road. And I can just kind of imagine, why would they want to stay in Jerusalem? Jerusalem has now become for them a symbol of pain and hurt. And so what they're trying to do is get away. Now, to be honest with you, there really is nothing special about Emmaus. Archaeologists kind of debate where it is. We know it's 7 miles outside, but exactly where, I don't think they know. But again, when you don't want to be somewhere, anywhere is better than there. And so that's what we find them. They're just trying to flee, get away. And they're processing, right? Because one of the things that we're told is their hearts are broken. Now, have you ever noticed that some of the saddest words in our language begin with the letter D? Some examples like disappointment, doubt, disillusionment, defeat, despair, and even death. And all of these words could sum up Cleopas and his companion as they walked down the Emmaus road together. They left the dispirited and confused band of disciples, wondering and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The master that they had loved, that they had revered, they had followed, had been horribly put to death, a very cruel death of the most degrading kind. You see, death by crucifixion was meant to be a shameful death. The victim was made to be a public spectacle. And they can even remember just a week before, on that first Palm Sunday, when the disciples' hopes had risen to a fever pitch, when the crowds were so excited that they were getting the Messiah that they so longed for, the deliverer who was going to help them, to free them from the oppression and the tyranny of the Romans. They shouted hopefully, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. And what does Hosanna mean? God save us, and God save us now. But their hopes were dashed and their dreams are over. The band that followed Jesus was now leaderless and was falling apart. The reports that Christ's tomb was empty did nothing to alter Cleopas and his companions' thinking. If anything, it only confused them. Their entire world was really coming apart. These two despondent disciples summed up their situation very neatly. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to save us and deliver us from this hard and difficult time. You know, it's interesting. Human hope can be a very fragile thing. And you know, when it withers and when it dies, it can be difficult to revive. Hopelessness as a disease of the human spirit is desperately hard to cure. Because what happens is we become afraid to hope again. Because we're afraid to be let down again. We're afraid of the pain that might come with opening our hearts to belief and to hope. And so what we find is these Emmaus disciples walking the road, what had they done? They have erected a wall around them, a barrier of hopelessness. It was to protect them, but the other thing it did is it trapped them within their misery. It also kept them from being able to see more clearly. Now, when it comes to pain, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to hurting, I want to say that there are actually some good sides to pain. And then there's some not so good sides. The good side is things like, the body and the soul are speaking to us. The body, the soul, our relationships, emotion are telling us very clearly, hey, something's wrong here. Hey, something's not working. When I was in seminary, I became good friends with Dr. Dick Murray, longtime professor there at SMU. I remember we were walking one time, and he was walking slow. He didn't want to walk in the grass. He wanted to make sure he was walking on the sidewalk. And then he apologized for his slowness as we were walking and talking together. And he said his problem is he could not feel pain in his feet. So he had to wear braces on his ankles for fear that if he stepped wrong, he could actually break his ankle and never even know it, and then keep walking on it and make the break even worse. And as he was telling me this, I was like, well, at least you don't have pain in your feet. Maybe that's the good news. And he said, because I was young, I thought life was about the avoidance of pain, right? And he kind of smiled and he looked at me and he goes, you don't understand. Pain is not a horrible thing. Pain was the thing that's going to let me know if something's wrong with my feet, because if I hurt myself, I hurt my feet, I could end up breaking it so badly I might have to have an amputation. I could get an infection. All kinds of horrible things could happen. So pain's not altogether a bad and horrible thing. And it really made me kind of think about that. It made me think about my own life and how I respond to pain. Because there's another side to pain that the other thing that pain does is it causes us to be kind of overly self-focused. It causes us to overanalyze. It causes us to go within only. And that's when it can become problematic, because here we have our disciples on the road, surrounded and walled off because of their pain and their suffering. And what are they incapable of noticing? Who's with them on the road? Jesus Christ. The risen Christ is right there. But they can't even see it. So pain is what pain is, right? There's a good part to it and there's a bad part to it, but God just works in and through it. As Cleopas and his companion are focused on their pain and their hopelessness. When you think about your own life, you think about the stories of your life, are there moments that you have some pain and some hopelessness? Maybe you feel pain and hopelessness right now. You know, I can go back, I can remember some stories in my own life, and one that I'll share with you was back in 2004. I found myself on an Emmaus road and having an Emmaus road experience. You know, it was supposed to be a time of joy. It was supposed to be a time of just being thankful because our family was being added to. I have 3 children, and the second of our 3 children was being born in March of 2004. We were excited. We were looking forward to this day. And so at 8:30 on March 25th, 2004, our son Grayson was born. I remember they showed us our new baby for just a moment, and then the doctor said, you know what? His breathing doesn't sound right. We're going to need to take him for some more tests. And they whisked him away to the neonatal intensive care unit. Galinda went to recovery, and I wasn't even allowed to be with my wife in this time. And I went to the room that was assigned to us, and I just sat there in darkness. Now, one of the things I always appreciate is I really do well when I can be a good soldier. I just need orders, and the simpler the orders, the better chance that these things are going to get done. And I remember having this, the general, my wife, gave me the orders, and the orders were, after the baby comes, here is a list of all the people that you need to call and let them know that everything, how it's going. And so I'm really dreading this because I'm not feeling good. This was not supposed to happen. I don't know that I even understood what was really going on at that point. And so here I was calling people, and they were happy to hear my voice because they knew they were expecting the phone call. But when I called, I had to say, but they took the baby from us, and the baby's in NICU. Now, when I said that, these very well-meaning, well-loving people, friends of ours, relatives would say back, oh, but I'm sure this is the best thing. I'm sure that the baby's going to be all right. The only problem is I didn't feel all right. I felt just the opposite of all right. I was sick. I was scared. I had all kinds of feelings going on. And I kept making these phone calls, and people kept saying the same thing until I came to somebody on the list where I made my phone call, and I said to them, well, something's wrong with the baby, and they've taken him to NICU. And you know what this person said? Instead of trying to make me feel better, she could hear in my voice just the concern and even the pain. And she said, well, this is not what you planned. Are you okay? This really must hurt. I can't tell you how much that meant to me at that moment. Because what happened is I had somebody validating my humanity. I had someone saying, this is hard and you're going through a hard thing. And I felt blessed. And you know what that blessing did? It gave me permission to do something that I so desperately needed to do. I got to cry. I just needed to kind of let it out. And so I remember I hung up the phone and I cried and I cried. And I was like, yeah, there is something wrong here. this isn't a good thing. Finally, they brought my wife back into the room, and we got to cry together. And at one point, we got to go down and see our baby in the NICU. Now, I will admit, our baby was 8.5 pounds, okay? Compared to the other babies that were in there, he looked like Godzilla. He was huge. I mean, all these other babies could fit in the palm of your hand. And here we are. And here's what we found out. We found out that when he cried out for the first time, those little areola, the sacs in the lungs, happened to burst. And so air was leaking into his chest cavity. And they said, it can be serious, but, we wanted to make sure. And then they said, and it's interesting because this has actually been about a day since he'd been there. And when we found that out, what was going on, we had everybody that we knew praying for us, right? So they even said it's rather miraculous. We've never seen this, but the baby's fine now. The only problem is he now has 2 staph infections. And I couldn't help myself. I'm like, really? Because he didn't come in with those. Where'd he pick those up at? And so they basically said, well, we're going to have to keep him now for 10 days with an IV so we can get this staph infection taken care of. Now, I will also tell you this. I hope and pray that nobody here ever has to take a mother home from the hospital without her baby. Man, that was really painful. I mean, our Emmaus Road experience of just being in pain, it just kept going, right? And I know God was there in the midst of that and that Jesus Christ encountered us, but it wasn't easy to see. And you know why it wasn't so easy to see? Because we had all this hope, and all of a sudden we had all this despair. We had all this pain. But it was interesting because we went regularly every day. My wife kind of lived there at the hospital, and I was going as much as I could. And when the doctors would come on to the floor, they'd kind of usher all the parents into this small room. And it was in that small room that we started talking to other parents who were going through this really same experience. And I remember one mom saying to us, you know what? If he can just put on 2 more ounces, I'll be able to hold my baby for the first time. And he was born 3 months ago. And she even went on to say that she had to quit her job so she could stay there with her baby. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, I heard all these things and I thought, you know what? It gave me some perspective. The number one, my wife and I weren't the only people on the planet who were suffering, who were hurting, who were in need, and that there were other people who were right next to us going through the same thing. And some of them, it was even more painful and more difficult. But the cool thing is we got to kind of be there for each other. We got to hear their stories and they got to hear our stories, and we got to affirm one another. I think it's safe to say that Kalinda and I still pray for parents and for babies who are in the NICU. We have a small understanding of what that's like. But it's not until Cleopas and his companion on the road could hear that they actually were able to hear what Jesus had to say. Isn't it interesting? They're walking together. Can you kind of picture this in your mind's eye? Cleopas, his companion, they're on the road. A stranger comes, walks with them. What are you guys talking about? And they say, well, you're the only people around that haven't heard about everything that's gone on in Jerusalem, and you have this conversation. And you know what? Why in the world Jesus doesn't go, hey guys, come on, it's me. I mean, they're disciples. They know what Jesus looks like. They know what he sounds like. But they didn't recognize him because of their own pain. So Jesus just listens to them. He lets them talk. And this word really comes in love, okay? Because what he says to them is, how foolish are you and slow to believe? And then he teaches them. Starts all the way at Moses and comes all the way through. And they later on say, weren't our hearts on fire as we listened? You know, he was speaking truth into us. He was helping us. He was giving us hope again. That things weren't truly and ultimately lost. And then the next thing he does after he teaches is he goes in and he eats with them. And it's there in the breaking of the bread, after he blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to them, that he disappears. Why? Was this some kind of like cool magic trick Jesus wanted to kind of show off that he'd been rehearsing? No, there's a theological thing going on here. They didn't need the external Jesus anymore. You know why? Because they could see the internal Jesus. They had Christ within them. Their hearts were on fire. And you know what's interesting? You know what the next thing they do? They're hurting. Matter of fact, it was supposed to be late at night. It's dangerous to travel. They needed to get off the road. But they got up, and where'd they go? They go back to Jerusalem. They go back to the place of pain and hurt and heartache and despair. And to be honest with you, we know what's going on with the disciples in Jerusalem, right? They're locked up in a house, in a room. They probably needed some good news. They needed someone to come and tell them, hey, it's going to be okay. Maybe listen to them first, right? And then come alongside of them. Now, you all do know, remember, I do like to be a good soldier. And this is a part where my wife always gets kind of upset with me when I tell a story, because so many times I tell stories, and then once I'm kind of done with the part of the story that I need, I move on, but I don't finish the story. And I can always see this. My wife's going to be like, you did not tell them what's going on with Grayson now. I'm like, Grayson's fine, all right? He's 22. He's a senior at Texas Tech up in Lubbock. Biochemistry is his major. I don't really understand it, but I pray for him. And he seems to love it. But I had to make sure I get that in there, okay? He's doing good. But I do want to say this for us on this day. I think what we have here in Scripture is we're on this road somewhere. We're either coming away from the difficulty and the pain. Jesus is meeting us in our pain, blessing our humanity. Jesus is teaching us, and our hearts are aflame, and we can see Christ. But then we don't need the physical Christ anymore because we have the indwelling Christ lighting us on fire, and it is that Christ that even moves us back into the pain and where we came from, maybe so that we can help others. Because we're not lost. We're not in despair. We have hope. We all have an Emmaus Road experience. It's my prayer for each one of us that God can open our eyes to the presence of Jesus Christ in our life and help us to see the Christ within who is leading, guiding us, and even us taking us back to the place of the pain so that we can be used by God in powerful ways. This is part of our story. And the grace of God, the love of Jesus Christ, continually intersects our life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time.